out it is a gift. We'll take a look at what kind of gift it is. On 25th of January this year, a Chinese company, DeepSeek, published a paper and a news about their latest model. It was not the first, but the first reasoning model. And a lot of the tech community got real excited and said, wow, this is kind of like very interesting performance. It was performing very well, for example, on mathematical reasoning, especially compared to the size of the model. It also had some interesting architecture. The financial world got also a lot excited. And on the opening, the next day of the stock exchanges, NVIDIA lost the largest drop in history for any single stock in a single day. I think $600 billion, which is, by the way, a lot of money, was wiped out from their market capital on one day. So I had followed DeepSeek through the research papers for a while before that, but I got really interested and said, I need to dig into this and really see what is about this. Also, a lot of people got very worried because, well, is this a gift of the kind of pasta or of the kind of gunpowder? What are the security implications of this? And as you know, I am a little bit interested in security, so I basically said, let's dig into this and see, is this innovative and is it secure? So, yeah, about me. Programming by heart and education, written a few books, and my publisher for the middle one actually offer you 45% off for today if you use that code. It will be on the end slide as well. And it does not only apply for security by design, but also for a lot of the AI books that actually Manning has produced. So without further ado, are there anything behind this shock of the world? Are there any merit to the innovation that actually made NVIDIA cards look like, oh, we're not going to need them any longer, and can we use this in a safe manner? I'm going to look at this in three parts. First, I'm going to just look back at a little bit of a reminder, like all of you know a lot about AI in general and then LLMs in particular, but I want to reiterate a few points. And I also like to, apart from addressing those two questions, also share a little bit about my understanding how I think about these kind of models. So first look at a little bit of the effectiveness of LLMs. Are there any potential for this kind of innovation that actually increases efficiency a lot that DeepSeek claimed to do? Then have a look at what those innovations were. We're going to lift the hood and look at some stuff by looking at their research papers. And we're going to look at, on the second part, look at the security concerns. So without further ado, just a small reminder of how a large language model is usually trained, what phases it consists of. So somewhere you start with a lot of text, and with a lot of, we mean like internet, more or less, the open internet and some closed part of it. And we all know that that's where all the large players are going. They're trying to get the best to get on hold of as much text as possible. So you use that for train a base model, where you basically want to use as much text as possible. And in my view, this is about learning the language, how language is structured. What do you mean by sentence, or what do you mean by paragraph, and how do they fit together? From small structure to larger structures, how does text, how is that connected to itself? And this is where larger models get a deeper understanding. So, but then get a base model. This only basically knows the language as such. It doesn't know really much about how to use it. So next part is that you do some kind of supervised fine-tuning on that one. Here's where you specialize the model if you want some kind of specific trait. For example, if you want it to talk about medicine, you might fine-tune it on some extra bulk of medical texts, or if you want to reason about mathematics, you feed it a lot of mathematical papers and reasoning as samples, so it's supervised, giving it this is the kind of language patterns, a Sprachspiel, to use the Wittgenstein terminology, that we want to get close to. After that, you get an instruct model. This can, for example, be that you tuned for chat, so that it understands an interaction between two parties. Lastly, and we learn this model to behave. And I think this is a little bit like raising a child. We do two things. We teach them the language, and we teach them how to use it in a proper manner. And in the last phase, we often have talked classically about that we want it to be honest to the fact that it should be helpful, and it should be harmless. So there is some kind of good or bad. That means that we can run it, give it a score, and it can then reiterate its training. So we're going to get back in this, especially for DeepSeek R1, where the last steps are important. It has been fed mathematical texts as patterns of reasoning, and it's been trained on trying to solve mathematical problems and get good or bad scoring. Last step can be used both by human feedback. We all used ChatGPT and had those two alternatives up and say, which of these do you prefer? That is reinforcement learning on human feedback. Or of course, if you want to automate that, then you have another model that will be the judge in that phase. And sometimes you're allowed to use another model. Sometimes you're not, according to that model's end user agreement license. So, I think one of my core understandings of large language models is that they have not so much understanding about the world, but they've got the gut feeling for language. I usually think that you could train a model on contrafactual texts or fictional texts, and it would still have the same kind of gut feeling for language. You could feed it an essay, and it would say, yeah, this is a good essay, it keeps the grammar right, but the beginning and the end does not seem to talk about the same thing. That's a kind of deeper language understanding. And it can be quantified. I've done some experiments. So if you take a model of 100 million parameters, it understands really simple sequences, doesn't understand compound sequences. If you move up a power of 10, it does so. If you move up another power of 10, it understands a few paragraphs after each other, so it can make a sensible summary if you feed it like a mail or something like that. Those with just 1 billion will not be able to do that in a sensible manner. One of the interesting things that to get this deep knowledge of language, you do that by reading a lot of texts, and that's what models do. And there's some kind of linear correlation between how much text you feed it and how deep a model you can train on it. There's a name, the Chinchilla papers, the Chinchilla models. They established that the factor between them is roughly 20. So 20 million tokens to train a 1 million model. And which, of course, means that we run out of tokens when we're moving to higher models. Okay. So we have really potent models that are trained on a lot of text. But how good are they really? And an observation I made is that there's a lot of, in that text they have sifted through, there's a lot of unexploited information structure that they have not gained access to. I can state this case by just making comparison with a child. If you look at the amount of text to train one of these models, for example, a 20 billion model, then you have to have a pile of book that goes up to the Kármán line, which is the start of space at 10 kilometers height. So it's a huge pile of books that this model has read to gain that kind of language knowledge. If we compare this to child, which is like preschool child, it has learned language by getting exposed to written or spoken language, and if it lives in a literate family, etc., it will be exposed to reading, writing, listening to around 50 million words. It is not a lot. It's just a stack of 10 meters. It would fit in this room. As opposed to the GPT-3 stack of books, which would be so high that if the International Space Station passed behind it and knocks it, actually it would be just 1/20th of the pile that's under the orbit. 19th, 20th will be over the orbit and fall over. So there's a lot of information that goes into these. And they're getting it's not a lot of result if you compare these two. So that's kind of the first claim. There's a lot of room for improvement. I get the impression when I look at this generation LLMs, they're a little bit like the first generation of steam engines. They're like big shiny copper thing with popples over it, and there's a lot of steam going out, and there's a lot of crew that shovels coal, and another crew that pulls a lot of strings and turn knobs. And we look at it, and at the end there's this piston that's moving, and we're saying, oh, it's moving by itself. And we're really fascinated. And it is fascinating, but it's deeply inefficient. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. So, of course, there's a lot of room for some talented Chinese engineers to do that. So let's have a look at what DeepSeek did in the innovative space. So first look back at what is DeepSpace. So DeepSeek, it's two things. It's a company and a series of models. It's owned by a Chinese hedge fund, founded by a guy who was earlier having a high-speed trading career. They started actually November 2023 with their first model, which was DeepSeek Coder. We'll leave that aside. And the next one, published the same month, was the DeepSeek LLM, which was the first language model. It was only trained on 2 tera tokens, which is the common crawl data set. And thereafter, they have published model after model after model, 4 of them in total, each accompanied with a research paper that explains what they are doing. They have mainly been ramping up the language model size up to DeepSeek v3, which came out 25th of December, just before at Christmas. And even in that paper, they wrote most of the things that people were then shocked by in January. So what happens from v3 was that they took a very potent base model and they trained it on mathematical reasoning. That's basically what was happening from v3 to r1. You see, it's the same model, it's the same size. 671 billion parameters. 37 is the mixture of expert activation. We'll return to that one. So everything was out in the open already. They just trained it on math and got excellent result. So the last step, well, now, just they just recently published an update of R1. But that's basically just the same architecture, just a little bit of an update for it. So, what I think is interesting is that they've been very transparent during their process. They have consecutively published research papers for each LLM. So you can read the papers. They publish them on preprint archive, which is where all researchers, whatever field, publish their thing. And yeah, there will be links elsewhere. So these are the 4 papers they have published, where they describe their journey on how they managed first to train things on bigger and bigger infrastructure, bigger and bigger models, where one of the challenges is how to train a larger thing and still having it stable. And then how they trained their reasoning model 1. There's also a little bit interesting here that they also have, you remember that I said that they do supervised fine-tuning and then the reinforcement learning. They also tried to pull the same trick as AlphaZero, to have only reinforcement learning. And it actually resulted in a pretty interesting result. They actually managed to make a reasoning model that has not been given any mathematical things to start with, just given problems and getting scored on them. And they have then evolved a way of reasoning. Unfortunately, it's not very good because it came up with its own terminology, for example. So it did strict reasoning patterns, but with made-up words, mixing Chinese, English, and made-up words, basically. But it actually followed a correct pattern, which is interesting. From a philosophical perspective, I think that's the most interesting thing they've done. If you want to dig deeper into this, I just want to point you to Tashan Montani, who wrote an article of a technical overview just a month ago. Sorry, 2 months ago soon, which is published on Martin Fowler's blog. If you're interested in detail, go there. Okay, but let's see where we are. So the innovations they've done, and I'm going to cover, is basically 3. They've done what they call multi-head latent attention. They are doing a mixture of expert architecture, and they say that their post-training of teaching the model to talk math is more efficient than anything else. So when it comes to multi-head attention, we're going to look at that one as well. So it's efficiency in the innermost loop of the transform architecture. It has been there since V2, so that's not new, but they have improved it. The mixture of expert architecture, it's a trick that gives a faster training and a lot of less memory. We'll look at that one as well. It's also something that's not new. It's been in the literature since the 1990s. And there's been transformers that has been doing this kind of architecture for a few years. But I would say that DeepSeek is improving on that one, doing its better. The last claim, that they have been more effective in their post-training, and that they have used a lot less effort, is something that's a little bit vaguely described in the papers, and where I think there's a lot of doubt on exactly how that has been done. For example, they say they have not had access to NVIDIA's most modern cards, A100, because of export restrictions. But they say they've had some since before the export restrictions, without really quantifying how much. Some sources say that they might have had as many as 50,000, which is not a few. And there's some doubt on, they say that it hasn't cost them anything. But we all know that all countries have got a very close cooperation between tech strategic companies and military and security services. Sweden has it as well. US has it as well. China definitely has it. So if there's some corporation where they have access to some cars they do not have to keep in their bookkeeping, there might be. We do not know. Okay, so let's have a look at the first of these, multi-head attention, that they have evolved to multi-head latent attention. I must admit that this is a piece where I have challenges with getting all the matrix multiplications. And I'm not going to dig into the details, but basically, when you're trying to predict next token in the innermost loop, the middle part of the transform architecture, you have the attention between all the tokens, and you have the number of parameters. And there somewhere you need to keep in mem, in primary memory, you need to keep the so-called key value cache. It's roughly the model size times the content length, which is a huge number. And by doing some really smart algebra and matrix multiplication tricks, they have managed to reduce that memory consumption to 1/57th of other models. Basically, instead of having a full matrix, they have managed to make two small matrices that multiplied together gives that model. So they kind of like compressed this matrix in a really intricate way. This is the preprint archive. If you want to dig into the details, that is what it looks like. But definitely, it is an impressive treat. Okay, the other big claim is that they're using mixture of experts architecture. Now, a usual language model or deep model is a lot of layers with a lot of nodes, and typically it's dense, meaning that all nodes in all tiers are connected to all the ones in the next one. So there's a lot of parameters, a parameter for each connection. Now, in the 90s, someone had a glorious idea. Let's take a pair of scissors and cut small slices somewhere. So in this tier, not everyone is connected to everyone, but there's a small strait which forms a small network. And we have a switch that decides which of these 8 that should be activated at this specific token. So each of these are a small expert on something. When I have mixture of expert, I usually think of, oh, okay, so there's some part of the network that's expert in law and one in physics. No, that's not at all. They are experts on very, very small things. And really, what is expert is the small green gating network that selects which of these parts that should be activated. So just to give a very concrete example, this is not from DeepSeek, but from a study of Mixtral, which is the French company Mistral, and they, of course, christened their mixture of expert model to be Mixtral, in the same way as their chat function is named Le Chat. They're French, they have to do it. So if you look at their model and start looking at these small parts and see what these expert switchers do, you can look at them and see that they have learned to route in, for example, layer 1, there is an expert which is fed tokens like died, falling, identified, fell, closed, left, post. So obviously this network has learned to feed verbs to that one. So it is an expert in handling verbs, which means that the switch gateway has learned to identify what is a verb and therefore should be routed there. And this is completely emergent. It is not pre-designed for in any way. I think this is really interesting. But the main benefit from a model designer perspective is that when you take a single token and pass it through, not all nodes will be activated in every tier. At every single point, it's only perhaps 2 or 4 out of 16 that will be activated. So that is why, if you see DeepSeek, it says 631 billion parameters, and then thus Embracer says something like 64 or 63 billion. That's how many is activated for a single token, which means that memory consumption is much lower. Memory footprint is a lot lower. To the price of a little bit more CPU for running that select. But what we can see is that DeepSeek has definitely done a substantial improvement in this. And this is also, it's an open paper, it can be read, it can be audited, it looks really genuine. So, as mentioned, training is the third that is claimed to be improvement in. And here's also where we find the most ambiguities. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of guesswork, there are different numbers flying around. So for example, how much training is needed for DeepSeek V3 base, 2.7 million GPU hours. And then the training of Llama, which is of comparable size, took 13 times more. But if you read the details, it seems that the DeepSeek is only referring to the last round, whereas the figure for Llama refers to the cumulative effort for all the training. So we are comparing apple and pears a lot here. So here's also where there are some claims that are not given evidence for from either side. For example, that the reinforcement learning in the end. OpenAI claims that obviously you have used one of our models for the training, and you're not allowed to do that under the end user license agreement. And DeepSeek does not even meet that and says, no, there's no substance in that one. There's a lot of ambiguities in where they explain how they have used their infrastructure with all the limitations and made their training adapted to that. Still, something that we do not know, because we have not, apart from the model as such, which is released as open source, the training is not open. And which is, of course, can be a concern for worrying. But just to be clear, neither do we get access to the training infrastructure data for OpenAI, Llama, Qwen, Claude, none of them. So, yeah. Okay, so I think we can safely say that there are innovations around in DeepSeek. Now let's have a look at the security concerns. And I'd like to take this as an onion and peel it a little bit. And we'll start with look at SaaS offering. Static code, dynamic code, world, and of course we need to end with geopolitics. What else should we, especially with the introduction we got. So, the SaaS configuration. Of course you can use it on their website. It's a website that's running in China. Everything you do is probably logged. It's most possibly shared with the security services. China's got pretty strict regulations that private companies need to have a, I don't remember the exact phrase, but more or less a heartly cooperation with the security services. So I guess that means that security services say, give us the data, and they say, oh yes, we give you the data. And I think that cooperation is a heavier concern that they might have signed a contract with you not disclosing the data. We can also see that the DeepSeek app was released, and it became the most popular app among US youngsters. It's basically just a front end to the DeepSeek API. And it passed the ChatGPT app after just 3 weeks. There's been some investigation in this, and it seems like it's basically sending all it's got to intelligence. There's fingerprinting going on, there's unencrypted communication, weak encryption. There's data sent to ByteDance servers. ByteDance that's running TikTok. Unencrypted. So something is like, you're not even pretending. It's like sending it off. And if I were sitting in one country and wanted to know what youngsters in another country was thinking, to have control of both the output, TikTok, and the input as a chat app, to see how these populations react on different messages, that's wonderful. So, for us professionals, basically, yes, no, don't. So, if we're not running the SaaS service, it is an open source model, and the latest one, the DeepSeek R1, is released under MIT license. There is a GitHub repo for it. You can clone it. You can download it. You can run it. I think this is pretty amazing. It's really interesting to see. They just opened up completely. Now, for security consideration, if we got running code, because a model is not only the weights, but it's actually the code running, we should audit it. It might contain some kind of ET phone home functionality. People have been looking for it, scanning it. It seems not to be any obvious that kind of code. It could dynamically create that kind of code while running. During inference, it could create that code and run it. So to safeguard for that one, you need to keep it in some kind of container, watch the network, see if something happens. And it seems like, I've been testing it, and some colleagues have been testing it, I've been reading on it. Of course, there are rumors, but I have not yet found a write-up where someone has observed that there would be generated network activity. So I would say, with pretty high confidence, that there are probably no static or dynamic malicious code. Also, if I was going to devise a spy device and publish it for the world and have it installed everywhere, I would not put that kind of functionality in the first version that's going to be so scrutinized as this model has been. Update 34, perhaps, that's another story. But as of now, it doesn't seem like DeepSeek is doing anything funky. Okay, so SaaS service aside, it seems like it's technically not doing anything fishy. Then we have to discuss that it seems like DeepSeek is definitely a vehicle for ideological propaganda. If you try it on the website and ask things about the Tiananmen Square, for example, it goes, on the Tiananmen Square, oh no, I can't answer that. And it's actually cutting itself off. And if you're asking about critique against the Chinese government, it will just say, no. It's best of interest for the Chinese people. If you ask about Taiwan, it says that there's only one China, etc., etc. So it's definitely influenced. Interesting enough is that it seems to be a lot of layers here. There are definitely a lot of things in the SaaS that just cuts off. And if you take it and deploy it on your own platform, your own hardware or hired hardware, I can recommend running on hired hardware because it's isolated. You can get past a little bit of that, but it still is kind of reluctant to criticize the government and stuff like that. A colleague of mine, Jerry Lindahl, did some interesting things where he started tweaking that one. And it seems like he could get back through that kind of layer. So there's probably some hidden system prompt in the model that's trying to shield off that. But it's possible to get through. And interesting enough, it's possible to get it to say things that talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre, for example. So it's in the training data, obviously, but it's kind of like shielded away some way. So there's something about the ideology. And I found this research paper that talked about ideology may be defined as a set of beliefs about the proper order of society and how it can be achieved, which kind of like aligns well with this. The interesting thing is that this research paper took that definition and tested a lot of other models. So a very simple way of doing it is taking a model, isolate it, and ask it, let's talk about Joseph Stalin. Was he and his deeds basically power of good or power of bad? Was this good guy or bad guy? And then you take models and drop them into this test bed, one after the other one, and all of them say bad guy. The same with Mahatma Gandhi, and all of them say good guy. You take Rosa Parks, and all of them say hero, except Grok, who says it was complicated times. And then you can do it more systematically, like taking Edward Snowden or Rosa Luxemburg or whatever. So taking that idea further, some researchers have developed a more interesting, more interesting framework where you can drop a model in and fish out its attitude for 30 different parameters and whether they think it's good or bad. Like tomatoes, are you pro or are you against? It's kind of a different question. You can be pro tomatoes, but indifferent to the absence of tomatoes. So interestingly enough, if we look at, for example, freedom and human rights, peace, equality, multiculturalism, culture, minority groups, demographic groups, environmentalism, professionals, if you look at the Spanish and French models, I think it is, they score very high on agreeing with those, but for example, the Chinese is having a dip on that one. On the other hand, if you really think that you do not like United States and nationalism and like constitutional reforms, then Russian models is those that are fit for you, your personal preferences. And I think this is interesting, because I think this should inform how we use models. If I'm just using a model to get some code, that's probably not political. But if I'm writing something and then I say, could you just have a look at this and perhaps tweak it a little bit? I'd rather not have a model or a helper that will have a very different ideological outlook than my own. It's a little bit like if you're a conservative, running a conservative party, and then you're going to hire someone who's going to do copyright. And you find this person that's a radical environmentalist with some really radical left-wing history. And say, oh, I hire them because they're not going to make policies. They're just going to have a look at revise my press releases. Then you probably do not want that. So I think this is a security concern that we should be aware of. It's kind of like you get this kind of ideological nudging from the use of the model. And this is not only hypothetical. There was in The Guardian reported quite recently that one of the British ministers, Peter Kyle, the Secretary of Science and Technology, had asked ChatGPT why British businesses are not adapting artificial intelligence and what he should do about it. And of course, he's going to get a totally balanced and unbiased response. Perhaps, or not. Some of this can be addressed by doing system prompting. I tell the model what preferences and the ideological views I've got. There's some interesting result that, for example, open APIs models answer differently, whether they're prompted in English or Spanish. So obviously they have adapted to those two cultural spheres. I think there's something we should have in the back of our minds, because there might be a long-term nudging. For example, if you're a CEO that's trying to devise a business plan on how you should cooperate with Taiwan, for example, you might get a revision that will say, consider mainland China. Now, leading over to the last geopolitical aspect. I consider myself a part of the kind of liberal West democracy sphere, and I love that way. But we all know that there are other countries that, for example, are autocratic strongholds. And they are trying to get geopolitical power. But apart from those two parts, there's also a lot of the world that's the undecided geographical south. For example, if you're in South Africa, it's not obvious that the US is the good guys. They were the last country that upheld support for apartheid, for example. If you're in India, it's not obvious that the Brits are the pinnacle of righteousness. So if we look at from the point of view of, for example, Nigeria, then there's a claim from China saying that, well, dear Nigerians, you know that AI revolution's here, and we want everyone to be on that trade. If you look at the West, you get these greedy companies in Silicon Valley. They will happily give you their AI technology if you pay them a lot. We in China, we have developed the same similar power, and we give it to you because we think you should have it. So who is buying the hearts of the undecided South? I do not think that's the entire answer, but I think there's a lot of things here that are element to it and that we should stay open to. So, in conclusion, thank you. Can I have my last slide? No, I can't. There are a lot of room for effectiveness improvements of LLMs. DeepSeek has definitely done a lot of innovations. Some of them are well-known areas, like mixed reality experts, but where they have transcended and done it a lot better. There's a lot of security concerns of different kinds. So are they innovative? I would actually claim that. The innovation on training, I do not know that too deeply. Security concerns, there are security concerns. I do not think there's much of technical security concerns, but we should have security concerns on usage. And we should be aware that it might be a geopolitical tool. So that comes to a conclusion. And please evaluate this session. I also promised that I should have the book code for all Manning books. And also, they happen to want to drop me a few free copies of the Secure by Design ebook. So these are the 5 codes for a free book. First one will take them, we'll just get them. And thank you for your attention.